Hello.
Hello?
What's this, 1990,
Hmm?
the number?
Oh, 1/6/1990.
Hello?
Hi, how's it going, Dr. Paul Thomas?
Hey, going great, man. How are you? Who am I speaking with?
This is Jacob Neeson from Sober Junkies.
Awesome, Jacob.
And I'm Sam. I'm here too. Nice to meet you virtually, Dr. Thomas.
Nice to meet you guys. You guys both do this together?
Correct.
All right, you're gonna double team me today. That sounds great.
Yeah. There's nothing we like more than a nice double team with another guy. All right.
Nice.
So you are a pediatrician and addictionologist. What do you describe yourself as? If you could just, like, if somebody were to ask you what you do every day, how would you describe it? And also, you struggled with alcoholism yourself. If you could just give our listeners just a rundown of how you came to get sober and what it was like prior, and basically just what you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. Are we live now, or you're just prepping me for what's coming?
We always edit these after the fact. They're never technically live. So we always can cut out stuff to make it flow more smoothly in general.
Gotcha. So you want me to fire away at those questions?
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Hey, Jacob and Sam, this is Dr. Paul Thomas, MD. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and you were asking about what I do day to day. And I am a pediatrician. I have 15,000 patients. Obviously, I've helped seeing that many patients. I have an office with over 30 staff members, about 10 providers, doctors, nurse practitioners. So I've been a pediatrician for 30 years. That's been sort of my primary job, if you will, my career. But I also now run an addiction clinic for the last 10 years. I help teenagers and young adults up to the age of 30. Sometimes I fudge up a little bit. If they're once you're with me, if we're still working on your addiction issues, I don't get rid of you. So I've got a few that are creeping into the early 30s that we're still struggling to become totally free. In my addiction clinic, I'm working mostly with opiate addicts, folks who these days it's usually heroin, and they have, they may have started their journey with opiates. Half of them, I would say, are, it was a doctor prescribed opiate for a dental issue, a surgery, a major injury, and they just ended up not getting off the opiates. And then when they finally got cut off, the withdrawal is just so intense that it feels much like the pain that you were treating. And so then you go find what you can, and what's affordable these days is heroin. And so I would say 90 to 95% of my patients these days arrive addicted and using daily heroin. A small percentage of them have been on a methadone program, and they're trying to get off of that. And we can talk more about that as well. That's a tough one. So that's the addiction piece of what I do. I'm also an integrative physician for the last 20 years or so. I got disillusioned with mainstream medicine approaches, which are very much a diagnose and treat. So you'll have, you go to a doctor, they take a story, they do a little exam, and then they say, you have X, Y, or Z, whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, autism, ADD, ADHD. It is just a group of symptoms. They give you a label, and here's your prescription. And it very rarely addresses the underlying issues. And it was for that reason I wrote The Addiction Spectrum. It's a book coming out September 4th to focus on, how can we empower people who are struggling with addiction, struggling with bad habits, struggling with a dependence to a substance or a behavior, take their lives back. And so that's sort of my focus these days, is in this world of addiction. I've got a summit coming up. I don't know how soon you're putting this podcast up, but my summit starts in 2 days on Monday, called the Addiction Summit. I host that. I interviewed 28 experts, and it's powerful. It's absolutely powerful. We're really getting to root causes and giving people tools so they can really start on the journey of recovery, or if you're already on that journey, really give you some additional tools to take it to a whole new level.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, Jake and I are both recovering heroin addicts, and we've both done the methadone program. And what you're doing, I think, is extremely important. And we're also basically just doing this podcast to try to just kind of transcend the taboos and talk about this in a frank and open way, because there are, a lot of misconceptions surrounding the idea. I think we both started doing OxyContin, the drug that Purdue Pharma kind of marketed falsely as a safer alternative to, the other opioids that were prescribed at the time. And not really realizing what we're getting into, I think, as a lot of, young people weren't. And obviously, like you said, those disappear, and it's, what's the alternative? And it's definitely heroin, which obviously has bigger downsides in terms of risk potential and all of that. So you run an outpatient clinic? Is that what it would be called?
Yes. So it's in my outpatient office. I've got a large pediatric clinic, and then right next to it, same hallway, just a separate entrance, a smaller addiction clinic that I call Fair Start here in Portland, Oregon. I basically am focusing on the opioid patients because I think I can help them. The goal, if you will, obviously everybody makes their own decisions about their journey, but the goal, if you will, is to eventually get you free of opiates. I mean, if that's possible, and I think for most people it is possible. You mentioned that you guys are on methadone, is that right?
No.
We've both taken it at certain points in our life. I have about a year sober. I think Jake has a little over 2, and that's from everything.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. I've got 15 years from alcohol, a little longer from cigarettes. I still work on the food thing. I'm getting pretty good at that. I sort of say, like, food is an addiction as well, but people... I just want to be relatable to everybody, right? I mean, some people tend to look down on one addiction or another as like you're a failure or you're a loser because you were addicted to alcohol or opiates or meth or whatever it may be, when in fact, most people are struggling with something.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea that they're prescribing methadone, a lot of times to people that are actually hooked on, say, Vicodin or Percocet, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I remember getting off of methadone was worse than heroin by far.
Yeah.
And just a ridiculous process. And the fact that that's prescribed as a medicine for it is kind of ridiculous.
And there's the illusion part of methadone that this might actually help your life. That's what I had a problem with, because when I went in there, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And basically they're saying you can kind of control your own dose. You can basically, tell the doctor that you're not feeling well and get more. Well, I was pretty much setting myself up for failure. And at that point, I had no way out. I mean, every time I tried to taper down, I just felt
horrendous.
Worse. Yeah, it was awful.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, you guys, I'm so glad to be on your podcast, and I'm so glad that you're sharing this message about what really goes on when you get on methadone, because while it's a tool, and I imagine it has a place, but man, when you take a young person who's, found themselves hooked on opiates and you end up on heroin, and then you're being told, well, here, go to a methadone clinic. It's free and it's safe, right? And the whole push there is something called harm reduction. And I understand the principles behind it, but I don't agree with what it ends up doing. So the principle behind this, and this is what addiction specialists like myself are being taught, doctors across the country are being taught, that harm reduction is this. We will put these opiate addicts on high-dose methadone. Therefore, their receptors are flooded with opiates. They will have no benefit if they go out and use. Therefore, they will not be shooting up with heroin. They won't be sharing needles. They won't be sharing hepatitis B and C. And so we're reducing harm, right? There'll be less overdoses. Well, the truth of the matter is, first of all, what they're doing is they're pushing the dose of methadone that people get put on up into, 100, 140 milligrams. This is high enough for a percentage of people to cause your heart to stop. I mean, it is insane, the level that they're pushing this to. And then, of course, you guys could tell, I'm sure you've shared this. I haven't listened to your podcast. I apologize. I just didn't know about you guys till you reached out. But I'm really glad you're out there, and you've probably shared what the experience is like with methadone and people trying to get free from it, right? I mean, it's just near impossible.
Yeah, I was on 130 milligrams after about a year and a half, and I mean, I understand the hit the red button, Jake. Sorry, I had another call coming in. We'll edit this part out. I mean, I understand the utility of it. Hang up. Call him back. 1-6-1990.
I guess it was supposed to be the left button.
Yeah, we had another call coming in. We're still new at this, so we're not good at letting people know, hey, don't call me for a while, 'cause I'm trying to do this. So yeah, like I said, I mean, I was on 130 milligrams of that stuff, and I understand the utility in terms of, I guess it does decrease mortality rates, maybe in a sense, and obviously, hepatitis and HIV rates, and I got through a year of school with decent grades, but it's like, what is your quality of life even like on that stuff? And for me, I was still abusing benzodiazepines. I mean, I was smoking weed every day, and it took them a while to finally kick me out for the benzodiazepine use. But it's like I'm still an addict to the extreme while I'm on that stuff. And there's really no relief. And I mean, I was totally miserable towards the end, too. Like, I'd just be sweating every morning and just, I mean, it was a disgusting kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you're sharing that message because, when you go to these methadone sites, if you go to a website, they show pictures of people dancing in the forest or up on a hill waving flags and happy. And I'm thinking, I've never seen a methadone addict who looked like that.
Yeah.
So the truth of the matter is, as you just stated, if you treat your addiction, you can be functional. You can absolutely, like you said, finish a year of college. In my addiction clinic, I'm using buprenorphine or Suboxone. But rather than taking people up to a maximum dose for harm reduction, what I do is I get you on an appropriate dose initially so that you can function and not go through withdrawal. And then very carefully and slowly, while we're working on recovery concepts and getting you plugged in with relapse prevention counseling and other ways of, really building up your overall health, will very gradually lower your dose. And I'd say almost all my patients are working or in school, very functional. Nobody's getting high off of this stuff. And, they're on that journey to becoming completely free, which is what my hope is for everybody. I found that when I started my practice, I was doing more rapid sort of weaning, you might say a detox in 3 months, at the most, maybe 6 months, 9 months. And I was having a very high relapse rate, probably 80, 90%. It was just, I was taking people down too fast. It appeared anyway. So as I've gone slower and given people the chance to sort of embrace the journey of recovery, even though they're on buprenorphine, I'm able to get folks down to very low doses and a large percentage of them actually completely free. So that's the approach I've been taking in my addiction clinic. I support all the programs that people can plug into, whether it's 12 steps, smart recovery, individual counseling. There's so many things available, including this podcast of yours, to empower people with information so they can take charge and get their lives back.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a question for you. Why do you choose buprenorphine over Vivitrol?
Okay, that's a very good question. So Vivitrol is an injectable medicine that blocks the opioid effect. So if you have a shot of Vivitrol for about 30 days, if you take heroin or take opioid pain pills or methadone or whatever, it just doesn't do anything.
Right.
You
I've
just
tried.
don't get any. Yeah. And was that your experience?
Yeah, I've tried several times. I would literally have to do a massive amount and poly drug with Xanax to get some euphoric effect for 5 minutes, and then I just wasted $200. I mean, it was awful.
Right. So my addiction nurse worked at a clinic where they did a lot of Vivitrol, so I had her experience with it, and there were a couple successes where, I mean, I recall one where it was a college student who just couldn't stop using, but on Vivitrol was able to stay clean and finish college. However, the few patients I tried it on, nobody ever came back because they felt so horrible not being, when you block dopamine intentionally, you now have blocked the ability to feel good from anything. So, we all do things that help us feel better. Maybe you have a good meal, you have sex, you have a nice conversation with somebody. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do that give us pleasure. Well, when you block the ability to have pleasure of any kind, that's a hard place to be. And to me, it was risky. So when you look at the package insert for Vivitrol, it says there's a 5% chance of depression or suicide. So interestingly enough, one of the first patients I gave Vivitrol to, within 1 hour, went into the most severe suicidal depression that lasted over a year. And that scared the crap out of me, to be real honest. And I decided right after that point, even if it's 1 or 5% of people that end up having suicide, that's not worth it to me. I mean, would I take a Russian roulette? Let's say it had 100 chambers in that thing. With one of those chambers has a bullet, and so 1 out of 100 chance I'm going to die. Would I take that shot? Heck no. I wouldn't. So why would I do that to any of my patients? So I do not use Vivitrol. I had that one near-death experience with a patient, and I decided, nope, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. I mean, aside from that risk, it seems a downside to Vivitrol also would just be, I mean, if you have that and you just kind of know, like, hey, I might not be able to get effects very easily if I get high, I think it diminishes people's, I guess, drive to try to improve their lives in general, which then you just have a terrible quality of life. Like if you're just going to eat like shit all the time and not exercise and basically just be like, oh, well, I'm on Vivitrol, so I'll be fine, then, your life is just going to be terrible regardless, even if you don't have like the onset depression like that. And I mean, as far as Suboxone, I definitely see a lot more utility in Suboxone than methadone, partly because it's less of a hedonistic drug, I've found. And obviously not long-term, as you were kind of saying, but I mean, the couple times I've gone to detox the last few times, I would always take it for a couple days. I mean, they try to push it on you as a long-term solution there, but I'd be like, just give me this for a few days and, so I can kind of ease myself through this rather than go into severe, agony for a few days and then get off it. But yeah, long-term, it seems that and methadone, rather than really seeing people dancing on mountaintops, you just see them, lined up outside a clinic the same way you would in, urban centers where they're waiting to score dope, every morning to try to get their drugs. So.
Yeah, no. So yeah, my use of buprenorphine or Suboxone, one of the reasons I like it is that it's basically impossible to overdose. I mean, if you add it with benzos, you could potentially overdose, but just pure buprenorphine or Suboxone, because it's a partial agonist and a partial antagonist, what that means is, think of if you've got 100 opiate receptors, half of them will be activated by the drug and the other half will be blocked. And so you can't overdose when you're only hitting half the receptors. So it's a very safe tool to use while you get people plugged into, supportive programs. Have them, how it is when you're withdrawing. I think there's a real PTSD factor to withdrawal. So when each of us start our addiction journey, we're just seeking release. right? Something's not right, and we reach for our substance of choice, and it helps us feel better. For a time, it's the solution to whatever angst we have. And then tolerance develops, so we take more. And then tolerance develops to that, and we take more, right? And so you're just jacking up your dose until you're at very high doses. And then for some people, you get to that jumping off place where your drug of choice doesn't even really, yeah, you get a little euphoria, but it's just most of your day you feel like crap. And then you're just, loathing the withdrawal that's about to come, right? So the journey back from that precipice where you're on high dose anything and you've got huge tolerance, if you go cold turkey, and it sounds like you guys essentially were able to do that, and hey, kudos to you for doing that. That's tough.
Well, it had to be in an inpatient type facility always, though, where there's just no way to get the drug. Otherwise, it would be impossible.
I was in jail.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's absolutely the truth of the matter. That you feel so horrendous if you detox without any support, really, that it's impossible unless you're locked up or in a psych ward type situation where there's a lot of other support. So, the other approach that I've been using in my addiction clinic is just slowly weaning that dose down. So it's the reverse of how we got addicted. So when you get addicted, you're ratcheting up the dose. When we're getting free of our addictive substance, we're ratcheting it down. And I find that if I make small enough changes, people can make those changes basically with minimal to no discomfort. I mean, you might feel a little less energy, just a little anxious, but nothing like withdrawal.
Right.
So that's the approach I've been using while trying to get people to change their diet. Gosh, folks, the body needs nutrients. We need real food. A lot of us are vitamin D deficient. The B vitamins can be helpful for addictions. There are a few other substances. CBD, for example, is a great anti-inflammatory and immune support, which can be a interesting topic because of the CBD THC story and what do we think about that. But also having people exercise, working on your sleep. I mean, so many of us, when we're in our addictions, we're not sleeping well. And we've developed bad habits for our sleep. And if you're not getting good sleep, especially hopefully at night, unless you have to work at night, but if you don't have to work at night, you should be sleeping at night, and hopefully you're getting enough sleep. Restorative sleep will give you a whole new outlook on life. And then there's a couple X factors, I say. I have this throughout the summit that starts on Monday, and also throughout my book, The Addiction Spectrum. And that's stress reduction and your community. So a lot of people don't realize the things that are actually stressing them. One that I like to point out, which is, we don't know or realize, but screen time. Like if you're on screens, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or video games or watching the news, it's a constant little hit of dopamine. And over time, hour after hour, day after day, it is rough on our system. And then the other one is the community. So you guys might be interested in your input on this, but I have 10 kids, raised 9 of them, 6 are adopted. And at one point I had 6 teenagers in my house, and half of them are doing marijuana, drinking too much, and half are not. And so my kids who are using marijuana, let's just use that example, Dad, everybody does it, right? So everybody in their peer group was smoking pot. My kids who didn't, well, no, none of my friends do that, right? So there is this sort of phenomenon of we do what the people we hang out with are doing. And once you guys, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Once you got sort of free of the opiate monkey that you just was sucking the life out of you, did you find that the people you surround yourself with are doing something different?
Yeah, I mean, everything had to change for me to finally succeed at sobriety. I mean, I've been to 3 inpatient treatment facilities, and I've gone to sober living, like 6-month sober living programs. I've probably spent about half of my early 20s in those programs. And I actually did watch your talk the other day on Facebook that was basically, why now, as far as like the epidemic of addiction, and your basic thesis did tie it a lot into obviously stress and then just bad diet. I mean, even though we are living in probably the safest time in human history, there is a much more, I mean, the idea seems to be that we're in danger all the time because of the media and because, you know, it's just so obvious that bad things happen and we get whiff of them pretty quickly. So that the stress created by that, and you just talked about, you know, kind of the attention economy online, and where you're just kind of always feeding this problem in one way or another, where you may not be using your drug of choice. Because I think I view addiction as just a dopamine problem, where once you get it going, you just want more of it. And I mean, I'm still heavily addicted, I would say, to nicotine, caffeine, and sugar. And I just cannot stop. I mean, as bad as I want to or need to.
Porn also, probably.
Yeah, probably porn too. I mean, I'm engaged, and even my fiance knows that I watch a little too much porn. And it's like, I mean, all of these things really do just make your life worse in general. And community, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the TED Talk by that British guy where he talks about the rat park experiment and says, you know, the opposite of addiction is connection. And I mean, we've done a lot of AA. I've probably been to 1,000 meetings. And the problem I've always seen there is they say, all you need to do is believe in God. I mean, I fucking don't. I don't believe in a higher power the way it's, you know, described in the book. But what I've gotten from AA is community. Like, I've met people that are trying to do the same thing that I'm trying to do. And you know, we're social creatures. And, you know, through that, and I really believe that that's actually what happens through the 12 steps is you make some amends, you do some introspection, and thus you feel connected to your fellow man. And that's actually, I think, it's a placebo when people say God's doing it for me. And that's why I think the program can cause problems, because I think a lot of people are put off by that prescription rather than, hey, just change your lifestyle.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. I like how you said what I had to do was change everything, right? It is true, because if I'm going to hang out with people who do opiates, and opiates is my challenge, I'm going to end up going back to doing opiates. For me, it was alcohol. For 5 years, literally, I would not go anywhere where people were drinking alcohol. Exception was my work party, where I had to be there because I was one of the bosses. And I mean, I just held a glass. At that point, I was drinking Diet Coke, which I wouldn't touch today. But back then it was Diet Coke. I just kept a Diet Coke in my hand, so I made sure I didn't grab anything else.
Aspartame.
But yeah, exactly, which is horrible stuff. But it's poison. But Rat Park experiment is so important for your listeners. So they put these rats in a cage by themselves and give them a choice of taking, let's say, an opiate, straight opiate, or water. And the rats who are isolated just start hitting the opiates till they die. Then they create this wonderful rat park that has wheels and lots of other rats to play with. And they put them in the same choice. They can have pure opiates or water, and they don't even touch the opiates. I mean, they might try it and go, oh, no, that's making me disconnect from my lovely environment here. And so that illustration that we are innately wired to be social animals, and that it's that social connectedness that really keeps us on the straight and narrow when it comes to just feeling good. So, you know, humans are animal kingdom creatures, right? And we are definitely supposed to be living in community. And I think that's a big stressor for a lot of people. I mean, we've lost our community, and we're isolated, and we're feeling alone. And that huge void in our lives, you've got to try to fill it somehow. And, you know, so you take a hit of your cigarette and you just get that momentary little feel better. I smoked for years. It was like pack a day, 2 packs a day, the stronger, the better. It's silly, because after that first puff, the rest of the cigarette, you don't get much out of it. But I don't know, it keeps your hands busy. You feel cool. You feel relaxed. And then I found alcohol, and oh man, that stopped the spinning brain, and I didn't feel so alone somehow. And then of course, drinking, you're usually doing it with somebody else or with a group of people. So now you've got people, so you're surrounded with a community, and it feels like, we're together. This is how it's supposed to be. And then that becomes your tribe, so to speak. And so now when you start to realize, wait a minute, this stuff is sucking the life out of me, I've got to make a change. Oh crap, I won't have any friends, right? This is what my kids would tell me. But Dad, if I was I'd have no friends. I'm going, well,
you probably don't anyway.
Exactly, right. I mean, these friends, if outside of the fact that you're using together, how tight are you really? Oh, so many of my kids have struggled with that one, and you do end up making new connections, and I think that's one of the values of 12-step. Thanks for bringing up the God thing in the 12-step programs. It really does mess people up unnecessarily. I was lucky. The first 12-step program I walked into, there was a guy there. His name was Roger, and anytime he had 24 years of sobriety when I walked in. That was 15 years ago. And he would say, I just don't believe in this God crap. I don't believe in God, and I'm sober for 20. I mean, Ed, you mentioned God, he was going to pipe up. And I was actually, at first I was annoyed, but then I was actually grateful because, the point is you just have to realize that your way wasn't working. How about trying it this way, right? And I think the fact that there might be something greater than ourselves is somewhat undeniable, but you don't have to label it. You don't have to call it God. You don't have to call it anything. Just get on the path of doing it different, surrounding yourself with people who are on the same path, and miracles happen, right? I mean, you've seen them. You two are miracles. It's hard to get off of opiates, and you guys have both done it.
Thank you. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate because we have the most opportunity when it comes to being inside America, really. I mean, we're so fortunate to have basically all, I mean, we are like the new rat park. We have all these things to entertain ourselves with, but I think we're just using it in the wrong way. And that's what I see as being the biggest problem. And in light of that, let's talk about the new Demi Lovato thing. People are so empathetic towards her, and they just hate everybody else. It seems like if you're on this pedestal of fortune and fame, you just get empathy and sympathy, and anybody else, well, addiction is a choice. It's your fault. You shouldn't just grow up basically and live a different life. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would choose to look at it this way. The fact that Demi Lovato is upfront about her challenges, and she's creating the dialogue, right? And I think this is good. This is sort of the same thing I'm trying to do with the Addiction Summit, the same thing I'm trying to do with getting my book out there. We need to start talking, and let's get out of the dark rooms and alleyways, and let's be upfront about the fact that a lot of us are struggling. And what does it take to overcome and get back to what I would call just vibrant health, where you've got life by the balls, you're happy, you're full of energy, you're looking forward to every day. Because what happens, I think, and it doesn't matter how much money you have, how famous you are. You could be dirt poor, homeless, or you could be Demi Lovato with millions of dollars in homes and everything you might think. Well, she's got it all. How could she be suffering from addiction? Addiction is for anybody who's feeling emptiness or angst. And like you said, okay, America, we've got it all. This is the rat park. We've got it all in terms of money and opportunity. But I think a lot of people feel more cut off than ever before, because you can go on TV and you can see lives of the rich and famous and, Pimp My Ride and blah, blah, blah. There's all this opulence. There's just wealth and happiness and happy people portrayed all over the place. And you're feeling, I'm not speaking to you personally, but anybody, I'm sitting here feeling like, well, I don't feel happy, and I must be a loser. So I think that there's a dialogue is really, really important. I'm glad that she's out there, and that, I hope she makes it, because we need more people to start shining the light on addiction in a way that says, what, so my book, The Addiction Spectrum, my whole theory is that we're all addicts, or at least addicts to be. So any chronic disease that you're not born, like I wasn't born an alcoholic. I was born to missionary parents in Africa, and I had a glorious childhood. I really did. So how did I become an alcoholic? Well, at some point in my journey, the stresses were overwhelming to me and I reached for relief. And alcohol was one of those things that brought me great relief. So it was actually the solution to my problems for a while until obviously I took it to the bitter end, right? Daily, too much, until finally when I tried to stop, I couldn't. I mean, I was physically addicted. But we're all vulnerable. So this is the conversation that the likes of Demi Lovato are going to help us, because if it's okay for her to get help, then it's okay for you or I to get help.
Right.
And I think it starts to open up the dialogue so people can come out of the closet and say, hey, I need help. Because, you know, that loneliness that you have at the end of your addiction, that feeling of just despair and hopelessness and empty inside, you can have, at least I'll speak for myself, even at the end of my alcoholism, I had my look good on. You know, I was one of those who was still going to work. I still had a house and a car and a family. But inside, I was as empty as could be. My smile was fake. I just couldn't, I was gutting it out to get through the day till I could get to my next drink. And it was a hopeless, desperate place. And life's completely different today, right? And so there's people are out there hurting, whether they're wealthy or whether they're homeless. And that feeling of emptiness is universal. And the solution is the connectedness. The solution is getting free from your addictive substances. The solution is, you know, eating well, exercising, sleeping well, connecting with people who care, you know, people who are supportive of your journey of recovery, not people who are going to suck you back into addiction.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've been trying to do this for about 6 years, and I've sincerely wanted to stop, because, you know, it was continued use despite negative consequences and a sincere desire to stop. So, I mean, I think that's the diagnosing factors in general right there. And it wasn't until like I had some quality of life like this last time around that I was able to stay stopped, because if you're miserable and that's the only real coping skill you have, then you kind of go back to it. And I mean, as far as America goes, so I love America. I used to be pretty far left, anti-American type. Like I would read a lot of Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn. But I mean, I think we have the resources here to be as happy as anywhere in the world, but they are often misused, and we can be disconnected due to excess in some of those resources. And I mean, obviously, as far as the corporate-controlled media, I heard you talk about this a little bit. I mean, there is going to be bias there in what's presented to us, but it's still better than a place like Russia or any other, you know, highly closed-off dictatorship. We're lucky enough there. And I heard you say you're pretty apolitical, and not to really take this down the rabbit hole of politics in any way, but I see you read the New York Times a lot, so I assume you lean a little left on stuff. Do you think it's important that we do vote? I mean, I heard you kind of say that, you know, that kind of the both parties are the same type philosophy, but if we want legislation to get passed that's going to, you know, help this problem in general, I mean, there are some people that are more worth voting for than others, I would assume. I mean, do you vote? Do you disagree with that?
Oh yeah, no, I vote, and my frustration with the parties does not mean that we should just throw our hands up and do nothing. We do have a democracy that's in danger because of the corporate America, that, you know, big corporations taking over our democracy. But I mean, at least we're not a pure dictatorship, and we do have a relative freedom of the press, right? I mean, here you and I are talking, and we can say whatever we want to say, and chances are they're not going to come after us.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of countries in the world where that's not true. I mean, you have to just speak a certain party line, or they take you out. So yeah, we have freedoms that we need to fight for, and I'm absolutely glad I'm an American. I'm just wired in such a way as I question authority, and if you tell me I'm supposed to do it this way, I'm going to say why, and if it doesn't make sense, I'm going to dig deeper.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
understand
the way I'm
that.
wired.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the disease of addiction, specifically the genetic part. You say that there's more of an underlining factor of, you know, just like your social and, you know, your surroundings more so than your genetics, because we're all predisposed to addiction. So let's just talk about the disease model. First off, most people that claim that addiction is not a disease because it is a choice is completely ridiculous. I mean, most diseases are a choice, in some way or fashion.
Right.
Hepatitis, HIV,
Right.
sexually, most things are
Yeah.
a choice that
Well,
we have.
even obesity and heart disease, you could say it's related to your lifestyle choices, right?
Right.
So here's the thing. There's both factors that play into this. Some of us are genetically more vulnerable to becoming addicted, and we're starting to understand some of these things. There's right down to what's called single nucleotide polymorphisms, where there's tens of thousands of these little glitches that any one of us has probably 20, 30, or hundreds of little genetic glitches that make it so that certain pathways, certain proteins, certain enzymes aren't made optimally. So you've got little glitches in some of your pathways. Why would we have a body that's set up that way anyway, if you think about evolution? Well, it's that whole responsiveness to the environment that allows us to evolve and survive when things change. But you end up sometimes with little glitches that now today put you at risk for becoming addicted, for example, put you at risk for being more vulnerable to the toxins that have now just been multiplying in our world at such a great rate that some of us are succumbing to those toxins that shut down pathways that now make it so that, for example, maybe your serotonin in your brain or your dopamine, these neurotransmitters that help you feel okay, are now not at good levels, right? So there's a genetic basis to your vulnerability to the environment. So you take just about any one of us, like I wasn't born an alcoholic. What would have happened to me with regards to alcohol if I had never drank a single drop? I wouldn't be an alcoholic, right?
Would you be
So
miserable?
I was sitting there at risk, right? But because if I had chosen never to drink, I would have never become an alcoholic. I think this is part of the conundrum here, right? We're all at risk for addictions to some extent. 2/3 of the American population is overweight or obese. So what is that? That's a lifestyle thing. We don't have to call food an addiction, but it's kind of along those lines, right? 2/3 of us are challenged. So are we just choosing to be overweight? Are we choosing to be obese? You tell someone who's struggling with their weight, well, you're just choosing to do that. I think you get some pushback, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's justifiable to push it back because you know what? They did not choose to flood the environment with the toxins that their bodies are now being exposed to. The, estrogen mimicking compounds that are just flooding their systems. And it is harder and harder to avoid being overweight if you're eating the kind of food that's available in America today. So, it's a lifestyle issue. You could say it's a choice. There are lifestyle issues that put you at greater risk for cancer, but we don't tell a cancer victim, well, you chose to have cancer.
Right.
That would be cruel. That would be absolutely cruel. Well, it's just as cruel to tell an addict or an alcoholic, well, you chose to. Why don't you just stop? That's a lack of understanding of what addiction is. Once addiction develops, what the addict or alcoholic has lost is that very thing you're asking them to do. You're saying, well, you just need to stop. They have lost the ability of having a choice in the matter.
Right.
And I think this is why it is so incredibly difficult. Now, there's a little nuance to what I just said because somebody could call bullcrap on that one. Because obviously, every day I wake up and I choose what I put in my mouth. I choose what I drink, and if it's alcohol and I'm walking through the grocery store, I can quote choose not to go buy it. But my challenge at the end of my alcoholism was I did choose every morning in remorse. I'm done. That's it. I'm not going to drink again. And because of the addiction, by afternoon, I felt so horrendous, like my head was going to explode. And I knew if I took a drink, that would go away, right? That's withdrawal. That's dependence. That's addiction. And that's a physical symptom that I couldn't control. except by taking my substance of choice, which gave me relief. And so this is why when you're addicted to that point where you're having significant withdrawal symptoms, it's a good idea to get some help.
Right.
Just like a cancer patient would get help for their cancer, or a heart disease patient would get help for their heart disease. There is help for those of us who found ourselves caught with addiction.
Right.
So there is a genetic predisposition that, I mean, it's kind of impossible to know for sure that you have, and without ever ingesting said substance, this thing wouldn't ever be unleashed. I mean, the thing that we hear a lot in AA is that, you're just born with this spiritual malady. And even if you would have never used drugs, you would just be totally miserable your entire life because of the spiritual hole inside you. And I don't know how much sense that actually makes.
I mean, so I think, I don't know. I think for most of us, as long as we weren't abused as children, if we had a reasonably decent, safe childhood, we can say that, we weren't born with a malady per se. I think, on the genetic vulnerability side of things, you can look down your family tree, and if there's a whole bunch of addiction or alcoholism, chronic disease, let's say, you could say chances are pretty high you're predisposed. And if you see that you're predisposed, I mean, and you can make a choice while you still have the ability to choose not to go down the addictive substances pathway, then you could avoid all that tragedy that comes. I think to just say we're doomed with a spiritual malady, I don't know. I mean, okay, if we're all spiritual beings, then it's true. We all should be paying attention to that aspect of our journey. When you start talking spiritual journey, it gets real personal for people. It's kind of it's a tricky one.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Oxford group was a Christian group, and AA just seems to be dressed up to appeal to a secular audience. They say you can have your own conception, but if you actually read the book, it's like a singular kind of omniscient being that's going to do things for you that you can't do yourself. And I hear people come in the program and say, before AA, I didn't know right from wrong. And like just crazy stuff like that. Like I needed God to tell me what is right and wrong. And I mean, we won't really get too far into AA because we've pretty much beat that horse to death on previous episodes. But I mean, tell me if you think this is a fair analogy. So we're predisposed to alcoholism, making the analogy to like overeating or obesity. So once you ingest that substance, and if my rehab knowledge serves me right, so you have like the disorder is basically just limbic system overriding prefrontal cortex, decision-making abilities, where, your main means of survival becomes this substance over, food, water, and all of these things. So would it be a fair analogy to say then if a morbidly obese person, the first time they had the cheeseburger and kept eating the cheeseburgers, it eventually just turned, I mean, is it the same as far as like the neurobiology there, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are reward pathways, right? And it's that rat park concept. You activate those reward pathways, and they were there instilled in our brain for purposes of survival. So back in the hunter-gatherer days, if you think about the human race, food was scarce. And so we have these pathways set up so that when you found sweets, you ran into some honey, you would eat as much of it as possible because this was a survival mechanism. The other piece of survival mechanism that's innate within us is fight or flight. So, when we were in a situation of danger, we would, our eyes dilate, blood flow goes to your muscles. You either freeze, fight, or you run like crazy, right? And this huge adrenaline burst is released so that you can do that with optimal power and efficiency. And it's instinctual. I mean, you don't think about it, actually. Your subcortex, the automatic part of your brain kicks in and boom, you're gone. Well, that's what PTSD is. And I think that's a mechanism that keeps people addicted as well, is because once we've taken that substance to the point where we need it, right? If we don't have it, we go through withdrawal. We're now we've activated almost a PTSD-like automatic response where you'll hear addicts or alcoholics talk about that. They had, I think the book, speaking back to 12-step, we had no defense against the first drink, and I think there's similar language in the NA literature. That's that instinct kicking in. It's survival. It's our base survival mechanism of fight or flight kicking in so that we don't die, but it's kind of maladaptive once you become addicted.
Right. So I just have one question about the disease model. There was one argument that I did agree with. It says in addiction, there is no infectious agent, no pathological biological process, and no biologically degenerative condition. So how is addiction a disease? And is the disease the specific drug? Like you have alcohol addiction and that's it, and you're fine with other drugs, or have the potential to be fine with other drugs?
Well, I think there's truth to both the medical model of addiction and the more behavioral model, right? So on the behavioral side, if you're a child, you need as an infant to bond to a parent for protection. And when you don't have proper bonding, proper protection, then you're gonna have some problems that develop. On the biological side, though, there's definite brain changes and brain pathways that change when we become addicted. So you were talking about those prefrontal and limbic systems and the amygdala and all these different pathways that start to get wired a certain way as you become addicted. And that's biological, right? So sure, it's not an infectious agent per se that got you addicted, but once you're addicted, there's a physical biological component to what's going on.
Yeah, your brain
so
is an organ.
So perhaps it's a behavioral thing that then has physical quantifiable effects that are in the realm of, you could say it's a medical condition or it's a disease. I think we get too hung up on trying to separate out, well, is it a disease or not, or is it just a behavior? And I think it's both. There's a huge behavioral component to this. The fact that as a society we've made alcohol okay, it's so okay that anytime I watch a ball game, I have to sit through a bunch of commercials that are glamorizing drinking a poison that would kill me. Right? So we've glamorized alcohol as being this wonderful social elixir that we all need, yet we know it's killing. It's responsible for about, I think it's ridiculous, 80,000 deaths per year in the U.S., something like that, if you look at all the peripheral damage it causes. I don't know, that there's a behavioral, psychological component to what's going on, and there's definitely those of us who've been addicted, we know there's a physical component.
Right.
Yes.
Because when you go through withdrawal, that's physical. You can't tell me it's all in my mind when I've got a patient in front of me going through heroin withdrawal who's puking. They're shivering like they've got the worst flu of their lives. That's not just a behavioral thing. That's a physical manifestation of something major going on.
Yeah, and as far as alcohol, as you mentioned, I mean, an extremely destructive substance. One of the few, I think, benzos that you can die from the withdrawals, and this is legal and embraced by society. Cigarettes aren't as embraced, but they're legal, and then obviously you can.
Yeah.
I think it's getting harder now to get opioids, maybe even to an extreme where people that actually need them can't get them. But at a certain point, obviously, the overprescription problem was truly an epidemic. What do you think of legalizing all drugs? Like Portugal experiment, basically, but we just tax and regulate everything. Because if alcohol is legal, and in my experience, I've never wanted to or not wanted to use drugs because of their legal status. More so, it seems, the war on drugs has failed. Drugs are here to stay, basically, it seems the world we're living in. And if we can just, mitigate deaths and diseases and, just treat people better and generate massive, state revenue for, programs that are helpful. Yeah, I mean, do you have any real opposition to prospects of that? It doesn't seem likely, but I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, I just have a word of caution about that. I agree that we shouldn't fill our prisons with, people who are carrying a little bit of marijuana around. I mean, come on. Marijuana is probably no more harmful than alcohol, and alcohol is probably worse than marijuana. So that's an example of where our whole legal system has been just misdirected. But think about this. So when we started our conversation, I think you were sharing about, various addictions, porn, food. We had opiates in the past. For me, it was alcohol and cigarettes and food. Think about raising kids. I don't know if you have children yet.
No. Nope.
But when you have children, when I first had babies, I wanted them to be protected. Okay. And then when they became teenagers, I really didn't want them walking around the absolute worst part of town where all the prostitutes were and the gangers and just, crime and danger everywhere, right? So you don't want to put yourself or your child in a world that just has so many dangerous options around. Now, I'll give my own example of my childhood. I grew up in Africa, in Zimbabwe. It was Rhodesia when I was there. First years of life, I was in a village. I don't ever remember seeing anybody drink or smoke. There certainly were no drugs available. And there was zero exposure or opportunity. Never even hit my radar that I might have a choice to go out and drink or use a drug. Now, high school, I was on a mountain in Swaziland in a boarding school, miles from the nearest store. Again, zero access to drugs or alcohol. As soon as I got to college in the United States, my addictions just went roaring, right? I found cigarettes, I found alcohol. And I'm just painting that picture. Now contrast that to my kids. Portland, Oregon, inner city high school where they could just go out the door, leave campus, find a street person to buy them alcohol, buy basically any drug they wanted. And it was, imagine now it's all legal and you can get it. They have the genetic predisposition that I had. I'm just talking here, but I'm just nervous that if I had had the opportunity to have alcohol, drugs, and every kind of drug possible, if I wanted to try it, I might have. I really might have. The way I was wired, kind of an anxious, high-energy person, and those substances would kind of calm me down. I think it sounds lovely that everything could just be legal and people will make good decisions, but I'm wondering if that really would play out as we're thinking here, or if added access is going to actually cause added problems.
Well, if there isn't a black market, though, I mean, murder rates and cartel violence and, all of those things would clearly decline. I think Portugal's seen nothing but good results so far. They haven't completely legalized it, obviously. It just seems that either way, if they're so accessible, if someone wants to use them, as you said, they can go off campus and basically buy whatever they want. And obviously, were we to do that, education would be extremely important so that you could start talking about these things openly at a young age, and obviously maybe keep the age at 21 for when you can legally buy drugs. And, maybe stricter penalties for people that provide drugs to kids, that go to the store and buy it for them. And, just tell them, like, hey, if you might be genetically predisposed, or in general, these drugs are terrible. The reason they're available is because prohibition didn't work, just like it didn't work with alcohol very well. And if you can truly raise a generation of people that understand what these are, it just doesn't seem that they would be, I guess, more likely to want to use them. I think part of it is, too, like, oh, it's illegal. Like, it's got kind of this appeal of, like, I'm going to go do these drugs and I'm going to be cool, or, a contrarian and whatever.
there is a little bit about that. I have to just I'm smiling right now as I think about, I've had a number of my patients in my addiction clinic who are, opiate addicts, but also smoke a lot of pot. And several of them quit marijuana when Oregon legalized marijuana. I said, well, what's the point? It's legal. I just thought that was hilarious because this one kid, he just cracks me up. So he comes to me one day for one of his follow-up appointments. We're working on his opiate addiction. And he'd been unemployed for a while. He says, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Paul, you're going to be so proud of me. I said, what's going on? He says, I got a job. I said, good for you. Where are you working? He says, oh, I'm working on a marijuana grow. And without missing a beat, I just said, oh, your dad's going to be so proud of you. And I was glad for him. He needed a job, and actually, I've had a couple of my patients who've been working in the marijuana industry because it's legal here in Oregon. Yeah, it's an interesting idea of legalizing everything. I think the jury's still out on the legalization of marijuana. It's going to happen everywhere. I can see it coming. The revenue stream for the government is too big for them to not want it, right? So they're taxing the heck out of it, and they're making a fortune. And there are some good outcomes from it, and I'm just nervous. We'll have to see if long term it ends up being a good thing or not. Just like alcohol, I don't think it's a good thing that it's so amazingly available. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, well, you've been very generous with your time, Dr. Thomas. We really appreciate it. I guess the last thing here, so you got these 10 myths about addiction that I saw when I was kind of looking at your book, and all of these I think me and Jake pretty much agree with. There's one I just wanted to push back a little bit on, but I'll just read them for our audience. So the addiction is the addict's fault. That's one myth. The second one you have here is successful people don't get addicted. I mean, yeah, we totally agree on that. All it takes is willpower to stop. Not true. The cause of alcoholism is alcohol and drugs. I think we basically touched on most of these in our conversation. It's okay for kids to experiment with drugs and alcohol. Next one, you have to hit rock bottom to stop. And okay, so this one, I think it's the ninth one on here perhaps. If an addict doesn't want to be treated, you can't treat them. And then the one after that is drinking and drugs are fun. So these two are the only ones that, I'm not sure exactly. Okay, so would you agree that if somebody really just does not want to stop, they're just not going to take the steps necessary, even if you get them off the drugs and they're sober, if they still want to get high, there really isn't anything that can be done. I mean, that's been my experience, so I don't know.
Yeah, but with a slight caveat there. So I'll give an example of my wife. As I mentioned earlier in our program, we were both in our own addictions. I was doing alcohol, she was doing opiates. Or maybe that was on my early morning Facebook. Maybe I didn't talk about that with you. Anyway, there was a time when we were both in our addictions. She had multiple surgeries, became an opiate addict as a result of that. And I'm an alcoholic at that point, drinking way too much. And we had this sort of unspoken understanding. You don't mess with my situation, I won't mess with yours. And anyway, it got to the point where I knew I had to get sober for my own life's sake, and I saw my family just falling apart. So I got sober. My intention was to have a year of sobriety before I did an intervention on my wife, because she was really spiraling. That was part of actually my motivation to get sober, because I didn't think she was going to last very long. She was headed towards overdose. And 2 weeks into my sobriety, it became absolutely obvious that an intervention had to be done right away or she was going to be dead. So we gather up our counselor, her doctor, her mom, her sister, her best friend, and we do an intervention, and we take her basically kicking and screaming to a treatment center. And she's been sober ever since. She did not want to get sober. Oh, hell no. She was so mad at us. But it worked. Now, it doesn't always work that way, right? So the more common story is parents pay, they take out a second mortgage, they pay a fortune to a treatment center for a teenager or a young adult who really doesn't want to get sober. And of course, they may or may not finish the treatment, but as soon as they come out, they didn't really want to get sober anyway, and they relapse. So I think there's that nuance there.
Okay, yeah, I agree then. I've seen that quite a bit with people that are forced into treatment by the law and they don't want it, but then they get sober and they realize, life's a lot better now. What's the point of going back to that? And then they stay sober.
Yeah.
That's my experience. I went to jail and they said I have to go to rehab, so I went to rehab, and then the rehab suggested sober living. Even at that point, I was apprehensive. I still didn't want to necessarily stay sober. And then it just kind of happened that way. So I was kind of fortunate.
And then drinking and drugs are fun. So I think that unless you're an addict, they are fun, right? I mean, I know people that do a little cocaine from time to time, drink socially, maybe a little too much, and all that, and they still have pretty good, fulfilling lives. And it seems drugs are fun for them, and even for us maybe in the beginning.
Yeah.
Drinking and I'm having a hard time hearing you. Drinking and drugs are what?
You had one of them where that drinking and drugs are fun, that being a myth.
Oh, they are fun, and it's boring to be sober.
Yeah, because I was saying that in my experience, like I know a lot of people that are normal in a basic sense, where they'll drink sometimes, they'll smoke a little pot, maybe do a little cocaine from time to time, and they're still happy and live fulfilling lives. And it seems like for them, drugs actually are fun, and even for us,
I would agree. No, absolutely. That's why we did it, right? I mean, there was an intense amount of pleasure associated with the process of drinking or using our drug. I think on that one, I was more trying to address the fact that being sober is boring, more that side of things, because I think the impression or the idea that most people who are still in their addiction is, they look at quote normies, people who don't do drugs or alcohol, and those people just look boring to them. There's this sort of excitement that comes with our addiction, and I just was wanting to sort of put out there that for myself, and I imagine you guys, now that you're finally on this journey of sobriety and getting off of your addiction, you're finding ways of having fun, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually nice because, you actually have to devote all your mental power to finding things that actually make you feel fulfilled rather than, just resorting to drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was more just wanting to point out that, like for me, my life is so full now that I've got the energy and the time that's not lost in the bottle. I mean, I'm doing stuff like this. There's no way I would be on a podcast with you. I was on a Facebook Live this morning. I'm going to CrossFit, except that I just tore my rotator cuff and had surgery. But other than that, I'm being physically fit. I am having a blast. My life is so full, and it wasn't that way when I was drinking. I was just gutting it out to get through the day. And at that stage, at the end, right, at the end of the run, when you get to the bitter end of your addiction, you're not really having much fun. I think we were having a lot of fun to begin with.
Oh yeah.
And then towards the end, it's more just trying to make it through the day.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone from being just suicidally miserable to just having a life that I always thought was a total myth, and it truly is, a miracle that I try to stay grateful for, every day.
Yeah.
Well,
that's awesome. Yeah, you guys, Jacob, Sam, you guys are miracles. I'm so glad you're doing this podcast because you guys sound young, and we need young folks who are out there, speaking the truth.
Yeah, well, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah.
Dr. Paul Thomas has a book coming out September 4th, as he said, called The Addiction Spectrum, and you should all read it. And yeah, I mean, thanks for talking to us. This has really been great. I think it's really important.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. The Addiction Summit, people can go to addictionspectrum.com and you can register for the summit. I don't know when are you going to put this podcast up?
Probably Sunday.
Oh, perfect.
Probably tomorrow, yeah.
So people will have a chance. The Addiction Summit is online. It's free. And folks, whether you're in recovery, you're on the journey, or you're just feeling like you need some help, plug into the Addiction Summit. You can go to theaddictionsummit.com. I'm the addictionsummit.com or addictionspectrum.com. Either way will get you to the summit. Register, and we'll talk again.
All right. Sounds good.
Awesome. Enjoy your day.
Thanks guys.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Appreciate
lot.
you. Keep up the good work. All right.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Want to do the intro now? From smack blasting to podcasting, welcome to the Sober Junkies podcast. My name's Jacob Neeson.
And I'm Sam Rad. And today we are having a conversation with Dr. Paul Thomas. Dr. Thomas is a board-certified pediatrician and addictionologist. He has a book coming out September 4th called The Addiction Spectrum. And, I mean, he's really doing a lot of important and wonderful work here on this topic. And, I mean, we're really excited about it. I think you'll enjoy it as much as we did.
Yeah, let's call him up.
Sounds good. Without further ado, here's Dr. Paul Thomas. See, we won't have to do let's call him up anymore, because we'll do the intros with the it'll be clear to our audience that we've already had the conversation. You know, and then that we're doing the intros afterwards.
Okay. Do you want a conclusion still?
Yeah, we should do a conclusion.
Okay.
We'll cut out the let's call them.
Yeah. How do we start this conclusion? Well, that was a very insightful conversation by Dr. Paul Thomas. I mean, truly, the guy has a lot of intention to help people and to motivate people to stay sober and overall just live a happier and better lifestyle.
Yeah, that was great. It was a great conversation. And tune in next time.
Yeah, stay fresh.
Out here.